Good evening. I'm Graham Allison, the director of the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs here at the Kennedy School. And it's my great honor to welcome you to one of the first forums of the new year and to an extraordinary opportunity to see two great public servants and actually for Kennedy School students, training to grow up to make a difference in government, two terrific role models. Their resumes are in your program, so I won't rehearse them, but the thought that we might have today with what's happening in the Middle East and ISIL and Iran, two national security advisors who until a year ago were right in the middle of this, one as the National Security Advisor for Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, and one as Obama's National Security Advisor, who themselves work very closely together, helping us reflect on how we understand what's now happening and how we think about what each of the governments is doing and what we think might be done otherwise. I think it's just a remarkable opportunity. So I really want to say thank you to General Amidror and our colleague Tom Donilon for being with us. So Yaakov spent most of his career in the military, 40 years of distinguished service in the IDF and military intelligence. Tom grew up through a political route in the first instance, but then from the Carter administration on has been in these very interesting jobs parsing the combination of politics and policy, including 4 years as President Obama's National Security Advisor. And both of them have thought about the Middle East. Both of them have thought about Iran's nuclear challenge. Both of them have thought about the U.S.-Israeli relationship. So all of those topics are good topics for us, and we're going to pursue them. The game plan for tonight is we're going to have a conversation here on the stage for the first half hour or 35 minutes, and then we're going to come to the audience where you're welcome to ask any question on any topic as long as it's brief and to the point. So if I can come to Iran through the door of ISIL, or ISIS, or the Islamic State, which is very much on the minds of especially Americans right now, but also the world. President Obama, having the week before said the US does not yet have a strategy for dealing with ISIL, last Wednesday spoke to the nation and announced a strategy. So let's hear what he said, just briefly, and you can see it up on that screen if this works.
I cannot see anything because of the lights. So.
We'll turn the lights down and can you play that? Yeah.
Now I see the
so tonight, with a new Iraqi government in place and following consultations with allies abroad and Congress at home, I can announce that America will lead a broad coalition to roll back this terrorist threat. Our objective is clear. We will degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL through a comprehensive and sustained counterterrorism strategy.
Okay, so two questions, and I think we'll start with General Amidror. First, with respect to the threat that President Obama says is a grave threat, justifying a major U.S. undertaking. How do you assess the threat? And secondly, with respect to his announced strategy, which has a goal of degrade and destroy through a coalition that includes the U.S. playing a role in airstrikes, but not boots on the ground, how do you think about the strategy? And then, Tom, the same two questions.
First, I want to thank the Belfer Center for inviting me here and our Consul General in Boston, which arranged it. It's a fantastic opportunity to speak in this place to people who might be in the future leaders of United States of America and other countries. But not less than that, to meet my good friend Tom. I think that if someone in the future will have to have an example of two states working together with all the differences that we had, but succeeded to overcome it and to work together, he might bring the example of Tom as one who led it from Washington. And I was very, very lucky to have Tom in Washington when I was the National Security Council of the State of Israel. If there are very few issues that I'm proud about, one of them is the relations that I built with Tom during my job. So thank you very much for bringing me here. Now about ISIS. From the Israeli perspective, ISIS is one of some or many radical Islamist movements in the Middle East, which basically, with all the differences, there are many differences between those groups. But at the end of the day, they have something in common. And this is the fundamental claim, that the Middle East should be, and areas in the Middle East, and for some of them, even the world, should be controlled by groups which represent the Islam. They argue between themselves and are even ready to kill each other, which one is the real Islam. But each of them, all of them together, share one claim. In the Muslim Brotherhood slogan, Islam wal hal, that Islam is the solution. So they fight what is the Islam that should be the one which will do the job. But they agree, and this is all of them, that Islam should be the main factor in the one who control those areas in the Middle East, and for some of them even the world. It is going from the Shiites in Tehran to Hezbollah in Lebanon, from ISIS in Iraq to Hamas in Gaza, and Muslim Brothers in Cairo, and in a way even to, in some degrees, even to Turkey. So, and there are many differences between them. I'm not claiming that they are the same, but there is something fundamental that they share, all of them. And this is why you can see Shiites helping Sunnis to fight Israel, because they have something in common. You can see Hezbollah sending his people and organizing a Sunni organization, Islamic Jihad, in Gaza, because they have something in common. Although those are Shiites and those are Sunnis, and in Iraq they kill each other, and in Lebanon they might kill each other in the future, they kill each other in Yemen, but when it is coming to outsiders, they have many things in common, and they know how to cooperate. So from our point of view, ISIS is one part in a big group of radical Islamist movement which are against the existence of Israel, against freedom, against democracy. They look at the United States of America as the big Satan, and some of them see others as the second one. In some cases it's Israel, in some cases it's not even Israel, it's the domestic ruling apparatus in those countries. About the strategy from the professional point of view, I think that from our experience, to get what the president put as a goal for the United States of America, impossible to get without boots on the ground. You cannot use only Air Force in those places. You need people on the ground to help you for the process of targeting, to collect information, to bring it to the accuracy which is needed to attack and to kill those people. So, and it's easier in Iraq because you have the Kurds in the north and you have the Iraqi forces in the south, and you can combine with them with some special forces. It will be much more complicated and almost impossible in Syria, because in Syria you have much less tools of cooperation. And you need to build it. I believe that at the end you will have to build it by yourself, based on your capacities and not the local capacity. But if I'm mistaken, and you with others succeed to build these capabilities within the rebels inside Syria, you might do it without boots on the ground here and there, special forces. I'm sure that the president didn't mean that special forces will not be there. But I think that it's possible in Iraq. It's very, very hard to do the same in Syria.
Okay. Tom, one of the virtues of your new life is that you can think widely and say whatever you think. So what do you think about the threat, and what do you think about the strategy?
I'm just going to go crazy now, Graham, now that I'm out of office after 35 years of doing it one way. But first of all, thank you for having me here tonight. And just to echo something that General Amidror said, he and I had a model relationship, I think, between national security advisors. It was open. We had secure phones on each other's desk. We spoke frequently. We spoke openly. We brought together experts on both sides from Israel and the United States to really work through analysis and to come to kind of ground truth about things. And it really was and for a school that studies things like this, I wanted to make that point. I think that he and I saw the job in similar ways, as an advisor to our principal, but as a coordinator, as a quiet coordinator in some ways, as a personal emissary of our principals. So I think we had a similar view of the position, and we really had a model relationship that might deserve some study.
It'd be a good case study.
Be a good paper for somebody, I think, to do. Additionally,
students, listen.
Yeah.
Opportunity.
Additionally, that General Amidror is really one of the great professionals in Israel, and really one of the great people I've ever worked with. And he has an illustrious career as a real model. It's great to be here with you tonight, General. With respect to ISIS, this is the next phase in the U.S. and global terror effort. It is emerged as a multidimensional threat in the Middle East. It's a large group at this point of somewhere between around 20,000 fighters. They're trying to build a proto-state, if you will, taking parts of Syria and Iraq. They moved quite quickly across Iraq, enabled, by the way, I think, by support among some of the populace who were so alienated from the Maliki government that they were willing to provide support for them to move across Iraq. And they threatened Baghdad, and this is the source of U.S. involvement. What's the threat? The threat is in the region, obviously, to upend states in the region, and beginning with a real threat against the state in Iraq. I think that through U.S. involvement, we have stemmed their territorial progress to date, working with, as General Amidror said, on-the-ground forces, including the Kurdish forces, the Peshmerga forces in northern Iraq, and beginning to work more effectively with the Iraqi security forces, to stop their territorial advance, and to, I think, using the leverage, by the way, of our assistance, work hard to get to push the Iraqis to form a unity government. And I think leveraging that assistance was an important part of this. It is, as I said, a multidimensional threat, first and foremost in the region, but because of the number of foreign fighters which have come in to join this group, and it's become the principal magnet in the world for jihadis to come and fight, some 12 to 15,000, we believe, have come in. This includes, by the way, maybe a couple of thousand from Europe. Matt Olson, the director of our National Counterterrorism Center, said recently maybe up to 100 from the United States who have gone to fight. And of course, the threat there is the return fighter who comes back to the United States, who comes back to Europe, who has an EU passport, who can move freely among the countries in Europe and find his way to an attack. So that's an important intelligence challenge, one that we understand, but the numbers are big, and we have to address it. I want to also say, with respect to the threat, it's important to keep this in context of other threats we have from, as General Amidror said, from these other groups. Today, I'd have to say that the principal homeland threats among groups to the United States is in al-Qaeda core in South Asia and al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen, who have demonstrated an intent, a desire, a goal, and the capability of launching attacks against the United States. And it's very important as we undertake this effort, I'll talk about the strategy in a second, undertake this effort against the ISIS or ISIL group in Syria and Iraq, that we not lose sight of the fact that we have other threats and in some ways more developed threats with respect to the United States at AQAP, as it's called, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the Yemen group that has tried to launch attacks on the United States, and Al-Qaeda core, who continues, although we have, through, I think, the most persistent, aggressive counterterrorism effort ever, we have degraded them quite substantially, obviously, the Al-Qaeda core, and that's the root of the strategy against ISIS. We know how to do this. And it's going to be a multidimensional, persistent, long-term effort to degrade these groups and take them down, decapitate their leadership, continue to push back against them in terms of territory that they hold, degrade their forces through, again, and it will not be an overnight kind of one battle or two battle operation. It'll be something that we think we know how to do, which is a persistent, long-term effort of a multidimensional nature to degrade these organizations, and that's what we're about to undertake. It does have, as I said, it's a multidimensional effort. It will, in the first instance, include air power, which we did in conjunction with the Iraqis and the Kurds to push them back. There will have to be support on the ground. The president has said this. So an important element of this, and this will take time to build, will be for us to rebuild, if you will, the Iraqi security forces, which had degraded terribly under Maliki's leadership, frankly. He ran an authoritarian, sectarian operation, and he paid a big price. And we are paying the price of this. So we're going to have to build, train, advise, and assist with organization, assist with intelligence. We already have 1,500 or 1,600 operators on the ground in Iraq. That'll have to grow, I think, over time. And so I think with respect to the Iraqi forum, I think we can actually, I think we know how to do this, and I think can succeed. Syria is more complicated, but again, we have a lot of experience how to do this. And you do have to have, ultimately, you do have to have elements on the ground to support your degrading air assets, and we'll have to develop that over time. But I do say this, and I'll finish on this. This is a long-term, persistent effort involving a lot of things I think that we know how to do, but it will not happen overnight.
So this brings us to Iran rather directly. So a friend of mine who's currently at the Defense Department says, if you ask the question, who is actually fighting and killing ISIL people on the ground today in Iraq and Syria, who's doing the best job of all? And it is Iranian-sponsored, Quds-directed, Shiite militias. Who's guarding the holy sites in Iran? Iranian-supported militias. Who's been operating very actively in Iraq? Mr. Soleimani. You can see him often. He's the head of the Quds force, the second most important person in Iran. So what role does Iran have in the war against ISIL?
As far as I know, this is a huge exaggeration of what Iran is doing against ISIS today in Iraq. It is more the Kurds and less the Iranians. Remember that behind the failure government of Maliki, the main force were the Iranians. So in a way it's contradicted to what we just heard about about Iraq and how it worked in Iraq before the new government was formed. And if that government will be different and will not be part of Iran tool in Iraq, I think it's the benefit of the war against ISIS. Because if that will be, again, a tool of Iran, the Sunnis will not cooperate. So if there is a way to do it through the forces on the ground, the tribes in Iraq, is by not bringing Iran into the center of this operation, because this is a contradiction that cannot survive. Iranian-centered job in this fight means that the tribes, which are essential to any success against ISIS, will not cooperate. So Soleimani, yes, Soleimani is there. Soleimani is also in Gaza helping to build Hamas.
Yes.
Soleimani is also around the world. In the last 3 years, tried to make at least 30 terror operations against the State of Israel.
And the
so-
US.
And
And
in
the US
some
in
cases,
DC.
the US,
Yes.
in DC itself. So Soleimani is everywhere. But I don't think that up till now, at least, he was so crucial in containing the ISIS. And I think that the United States Air Force was much more important in this job of containing the ISIS. And if United States of America wants to succeed in this war against ISIS, they should recruit the tribes and not Iran. And you cannot recruit both of them. They cannot be in the same pot, even if you make all your efforts. It is going back to 100 years of war between the two sides.
But let me be clear. I was not suggesting the U.S. is recruiting Iran. Iran has been doing this itself without any consultation.
Yeah.
But if you go back to Tom, if you look at the operation like the one that went down in Amerli just the last couple of weeks, basically the U.S. provided Air Force and attack targets, but the people who fought on the ground were Iranian militias.
Well, I think I agree with General Amidror. I mean, the key element here will be United States assistance, advice, and forces, I think, in terms of pushing back ISIS. And you go through 3 or 4 elements of this. I think the General's exactly right. You couldn't have had this conference the other day in Paris if you invited Iran. You wouldn't have had Sunni participation. And it's absolutely critical. We talked earlier about the necessity of having ground elements supporting this. In order to take back territory, you have to have a ground element, right, as General Amidror was saying. And the 3 potential sources of ground elements in Iraq are the Iraqi security forces, number 1, that need to be rebuilt. And we're building teams, by the way, in Iraq to work with them. That's what the number of our forces are doing. Number 2 would be the Peshmerga, that is the Kurd militia, Kurd forces in northern Iraq. And the 3rd will be the Sunni tribes. And one of the most important initiatives that we're pursuing in Iraq right now is the development of so-called National Guards, right, who are really the successors to the Iraq Awakening, the Anbar Awakening, who will be Sunni-based, locally based guard units, right, who are going to be another critical source of being able to stabilize Iraq and push against ISIS. And it is contrary to having the Iranians directly involved. Second, these Shia militias, right? You know, the last iteration of the Shia militia groups in Iraq were killing us, okay? So, you know, we have been right up against these guys, Graham, all right? And enough said on this, right, you know? And is that a fair point, General?
No, I'm not.
But
let me be
but
clear.
the point
I'm
is
not
it's a
proposing
complicated
these
thing.
are
So
good guys. I'm just asking
but let me
who is
tell you-
actually killing whom.
Well, let me tell you
and
where
I
it
know
goes,
this
though.
for
Yeah.
the Iraqi army,
Yeah.
just to be the skeptic for
Yeah.
a second, I think that we, for 8 years, spent how many billions of dollars and trained a force of 350,000
Yeah.
that we said were certified. And I look and see how they fight.
Yeah.
I don't see any fight there.
Well, but they have, as I said earlier, one of the principal projects the United States will undertake, right, is to take this back out from under the political cronyism that Maliki had run with respect to the armed forces, and to re-professionalize it, frankly. And it's a project that we've undertaken. The point on the Shia militias is that it is contrary to our having to work with a number of the Sunni groups. You have to also ask yourself about what's the Iranian interest in the kind of government that Iraq will have. And again, we need to have a unity government there that reaches out and doesn't commit the same mistakes that the Maliki government did. And the last point I'll make on Iran is this. It is very important that anything that they try to indicate to us that they would do in terms of assistance in Iraq not be able to be used in any way as leverage in the nuclear negotiations, which are, you know, we have obviously number of crises going on in the world, including this ISIS pushback, as I said, which I see as a long-term counterterrorism effort that I think we can succeed at. But the most important security negotiation going on in the world right now is the U.S.-Iranian the international community P5+1 Iranian negotiations.
And President Rouhani and the Iranian team will be in New York next week for the UN General Assembly,
Starting
as
tomorrow.
will President Obama and Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, and actually the conversations and then negotiations of P5+1 are just starting up now. Now, we're almost a year into the interim agreement, which you helped create the context for that. The interim agreement between the P5+1 and Iran essentially froze, again, it's more complicated than that, but in one line, froze the Iranian overt advance on the one hand and sanctions on the other for a year. So at the time, if I did my homework right,
24th of November.
yes, and when the agreement was reached, General Amidror, you wrote a piece in the New York Times in which you said, this agreement, quote, made the world a more dangerous place, close quote. So looking back on the year, you agree or disagree, and then on that basis, if we ask what's going to happen in New York, or what's going to happen by November 24th, should we extend it or not? Or if not, what? Yeah.
First of all, I agree with myself.
Good.
You know, it's problematic, but that's what I decided. I thought then, and I think today, that there was one big mistake on the basis of this interim agreement. And this is the notion that for having a negotiation with the Iranians, the United States of America should ease the sanctions on Iran. I thought that basically it's not the right way to make negotiations with Iran. And if you look at the results, the Iranians didn't compromise. And it is almost a year since then. They found many ways to enhance their economy. More than actual enhancement, it is the psychological atmosphere around it. And you look at the Iranian rial, you can see it going up since then. And the pressure is not the same pressure that had on their system a year ago because of the easing of some of the sanctions, not all of them, of course, but some of them. And I thought that psychologically it was you missed an opportunity to put more pressure, or at least to keep the same pressure to negotiate with the Iranians under heavy pressure and not to ease it. I know I'm in the business of negotiation with the Iranians, I think, 15 years. And I remember the Europeans, when you didn't take part in this negotiation, telling us all the time that this is a very important and very critical, and they call it dialogue. At the end, I understood. In this dialogue, both sides sit together and criticize the Americans and the Israelis. Nothing happened during the dialogue with the Europeans and the Iranians, but one. The Iranians continue to enhance their capability to build nuclear weapon at the end. And I thought a year ago that we have a moment here that we should stand fast and don't give up, to put pressure on the Iranians and to use the pressure to lead them into compromise. What happened is that in the last minute, the decision to ease part of the sanctions led the Iranians to the feeling that they don't want the world to worry. The other side wants the agreement more than Iran, so we should not compromise. And I think today that was a huge mistake, but what worries me more is not the past, is the future. The Iranians are now playing a game. They don't give anything. And in the last 24 hours, they will put offer on the table. And everyone will feel great about it, because compared to the very pessimistic situation today or 24 hours before that, here we have an offer from the Iranians. And although it was very clear when the Secretary of State said that bad agreement is worse than no agreement, some people around the world which do not like the fact that the President of the United States of America said that there is another option on the table. And the truth of the matter is that before this administration of President Obama, the United States of America didn't have the capability to do the job. And because of strict order from the President, United States of America today has the capability. Too many people around the world don't like this capability and not want that this option will be used, and they might put pressure to get the bad agreement and to call it a good one. And from our point of view, from the Israeli perspective, this is the worst results of any negotiation. And we made everyone understood that bad agreement will not tie the hands of the state of Israel, and we will have to make our own calculation based on what was said by the President of the United States of America. Israel should be in a position to defend itself by itself.
So, Tom, is the world a more dangerous place today because of the agreement? So that's the first question, as General Yaakov argued a year ago. Yeah. Yes or no? And then as you look to the next stage, are you worried we're going to make a bad agreement or that there's going to be no agreement? And if there's no agreement, what's our next best move? Yeah.
Well, that's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So let me start from the beginning. One, let's ask how did we get here? Because General Amidror and I worked very hard on this together. We got here through a comprehensive pressure effort, and a number of
led by the United States of America.
Yeah, and a number of people didn't think we would do it or that we could pull it off. And it was a relentless effort with many dimensions. It had obviously the economic sanctions dimension, including very tightly targeted sanctions on the energy sector in Iran, and cut in half their energy revenues. And because of it's an important insight again it's another good paper for somebody at the Kennedy School, because of the unique place that the United States has in the international financial system, with our banking system here and the dollar. The United States has tremendous ability through its sanctions to affect countries. So it goes like this. If a bank in the world, we can put a sanction in place that says, and we did with respect to Iran, if you deal with a certain bank in Iran, or in this case the Iranian Central Bank, you can't deal with the US system. And that's a very powerful sanction because you can't be an international bank and not deal with the US system and deal in dollars. That's a very important aspect. It's the most powerful aspect of our sanctions regime. We put those economic sanctions in place, working with the Congress and working with partners throughout the world, including, by the way, the Chinese and the Russians. That's a whole other story as to how that came about. It basically came about because at the outset of the administration, they came to us and said, you have to negotiate with the Iranians, you have to open the door. We said, well, we'll make a bona fide offer. But if they don't come through the door that we open, you have to work with us to put in place a pressure campaign. Because it was our analysis in looking at Iranian behavior since the revolution that the only time the Iranian state had made really substantial changes in strategy was under extreme pressure. And that was the kind of pressure that we decided to put together. It had other elements to it, including diplomatic isolation and pressure. And as General Amidror said, we also undertook a substantial buildup of forces in the region to indicate to them and to the world that, in fact, the statement that we made, that all options are on the table, we had the ability to do it. And we do today, by the way, still have the ability to do it. There are between 35,000 and 40,000 U.S. forces in the Persian Gulf and a full range of capabilities to execute anything that we decide to do. So we got here through a multidimensional, relentless, multi-year coalition pressure campaign, I think is a fair way to describe it. This resulted in the spring of 2013 in Rouhani being elected, I think. Rouhani came to the Iranian people who were under extreme economic pressure and said he would do something about the economy. The only way to do something about the economy would be to address the nuclear file. And that is essentially, I think, how we got to these negotiations. I think an important set of lessons there with respect to statecraft and with respect to Iranian behavior, which is very difficult. That's a whole other topic, right. Difficult to penetrate. But now to the interim agreement, which was entered. I think it's actually a fairly solid basis on which to have a negotiation. But that doesn't go to the point of the ultimate outcome. With respect to it being a solid basis for negotiation, it did freeze in place a growing program, what had been a growing program. it indicated that, and they agreed and they have abided by it, that they couldn't increase the amount of low-enriched uranium they have in their stockpiles, that they couldn't put any new centrifuges in place and operate them, that they would stop the construction at their potentially plutonium-producing plant at Iraq and Iran. And with respect to the most dangerous stockpile that they had, this 20% enriched uranium, which Prime Minister Netanyahu pointed out in a speech at the United Nations was a red line for him. As part of these negotiations, and as part of the interim deal, they agreed to dilute or basically neutralize their entire stockpile of 20% uranium, and they agreed to intensive inspections. So you had a freeze and a bit of a rollback and intense inspections, which I think was obviously it went to really what people worried about in the negotiation, which is that during the pendency of the negotiation, the Iranians would grow the program. Right. We would talk, they would build, and that's not what happened here. So I think it is a reasonable basis on which to have a negotiation. Going forward, there have been very tough issues in a short time to actually deal with them, frankly, and fundamental issues with respect to the level of confidence that the world can have that the Iranians can be kept from pursuing a nuclear weapon without us being able to affect it, which is essentially the goal.
So do you worry about the Iranians coming in, the Amidror hypothesis? Here we are, we get to November 22nd, 23rd, so we're going to come to the end of the period. They come and put some proposition on the table, and the Obama administration accepts a bad deal because they're so eager to have any deal?
Well, the Obama administration in the world should not accept a bad deal, right? Because I do think that at the end of the day, I think the leverage is on the side of over the long haul, the leverage is on the side of the international community. So we shouldn't accept a bad deal, and I don't think we'll accept a bad deal. But this point that General Amidror has made about coming in with last-minute things, I think is a fair point. Indeed, you see what's happening here is that you'll see that the leadership in Iran has been putting maximalist positions on the table. Indeed, so the supreme leader indicate that they now have about 19,000 centrifuges in place, and about half of that, about 9,400 or 9,500, I think, Gary, operating in Iran right now. And the supreme leader went out and said they needed 190,000. Right, and of course it doesn't take a negotiations genius here at the Harvard Negotiations Center to say that that's a maximalist position and they're going to come in with a position far short of 190,000 and call it a compromise. Obviously, that's an obvious set of moves that could be made. And I think that in these negotiations and the talks that are going to begin this week, I would think that the U.S. side should indicate that that's not on. That essentially there are some absolutely critical requirements here that are going to have to be met, or there won't be a deal. And there'll be consequences. The last thing I'll say is, if I can, I'm sorry, is that it is critically important that we in the international community communicate to the Iranians that there's a high cost to not having a deal. And that's a critical point, that in fact, because they have a way of deluding themselves sometimes about their situation in the world. I think it's very important for the United States, the international community, to indicate that if we don't come to an agreement with the Iranians that gives the international community the required confidence that they're not pursuing a nuclear weapon, that the price will be very high and increasingly high over time.
And again, just we're going to turn to the audience. Right now, there are microphones on the ground floor and on the loges. And actually, David, if you have a question, we'll let you ask the first question. But in any case, just to follow up on your point, Tom, so I would say the betting in the conventional wisdom in the community that surrounds things is that we'll get to November 24th, we will not have an agreement, we'll find a way to extend basically the freeze for modest relief, so there won't be an increased price. So you're saying if we don't, so what would you do to try to make credible that we're not simply going to let this roll for another 6 months or a year, that there's a price to...
Well, I think, my point was in the event of a breakdown.
A breakdown.
Right, yeah, a breakdown in the negotiations between the United States and on the one side and the West and the international community, again, including the Chinese and the Russians on one side and the Iranians, that a breakdown would come at a high cost.
I think with that, if that will not will be an agreement between between now and the 24th of November, if the pressure will not be raised on the Iranians, the chances to have an agreement is decreasing.
Yeah.
Because you can see during the year, they manage their economy through the ease of the economies. They're not satisfied from the result. They want a better system, but they can live with it. And if the other side can live with the pressure, it means that the pressure is not enough and you will not get to the point that you want to get. So, of course, technically the easiest solution is to extend it. This is nothing happened. But it's not true that nothing happened. It means that the Iranians have another 6 months to deal with their economy and to find better ways to deal with the problems that they are facing because of the sanctions that still exist. So if you want an agreement, if you want a good agreement at the end, you have to raise the level of pressure. And I think that that will be psychologically and politically a mistake not to do it and just to extend.
Okay, well, we'll get a chance to watch that. Let me see if David or Gary wants to make a comment. Gary Seymour, who's the director for research at the Belfer Center, was managing the Iran
He was
and
representative of Iran in the White House.
Of Iran or of Israel?
Of Iran.
Iran, okay. I don't think many of his, I don't think Tom recognized him in that role. So he played it very.
Whenever we spoke about Iran, Tom used to say, let's Gary come in.
Let Gary talk. Okay, well, that's because he knew about Iran and was dealing with Iran. Gary, you want to say anything? Go defend yourself, let's say. Get the microphone, go, please, yeah. And then we'll go to this gentleman.
The American people are lucky to have Gary in the White House, believe me.
Absolutely, and we're very lucky to have him here at the Belfer
That
Center.
I know. I don't know how he's as a teacher. That I don't know.
He's brilliant.
Thank you very much, General. I must say it was a real, when I got the phone call to come to Tom's office, and it was just me and the two of you and one other person taking notes, it was quite interesting to listen to the debate. And, sometimes I thought one side or the other had the better side of the argument, but of course I had my instructions. So I knew what side I had to argue in favor of. But I do think it was really a tremendous relationship that we built on the Iran issue, and it really, I think, even though we did sometimes disagree, I think it really did, certainly in my government experience, one of the best examples I know of incredibly close, cooperation between two governments. I guess the question I would ask is as far as I can tell, the Supreme Leader, as he views the world and calculates the balance of power, he thinks that things are going in his favor. He thinks that the Ukraine crisis has weakened the unity of the P5+1 and therefore, reduced pressure on him to make painful nuclear concessions. He thinks the rise of the threat from Islamic State has made Iran more indispensable and therefore reduces pressure on him. So I think the big challenge that the US and Israel and other countries face is how to persuade him that, in fact, he can afford to continue to say no until he reveals whatever his last-minute offer is. And I think, assuming that it's not acceptable, I think there'll be a lot of pressure on Washington to try to keep the process going. Because in the midst of all the other crises we're facing, it's going to be a hard sell to persuade people that we should add yet another complication to the challenges we have in the Middle East. So I'd be interested in both of your responses to that.
I think that what just, as always what Gary said about the Iran is this is the picture. This is the real truth of the situation. I can tell you that from the Israeli point of view, the threat of Iran is totally different league of threats than all the others. So if we have to make a competition between allocating resources to any of these crises, from the Israeli point of view, the priority is very clear. And I think that there is a way not to add another front to the Middle East crisis, but to use the end of the negotiations in November and to begin to build a new pressure on Iran. So the Iranians will have to understand that although Russia, Ukraine, Europe issue, in a way, some tension around China, and other issues that might bring the leader to think that is indispensable, the world can continue to put pressure because it is not making any more problems within the Middle East relating to other crises. So at least that will be clear. At the end, if that will not help, we will all have to sit together to come to understanding what is the next page. We did it in the past in I think relatively good success, and should be done in the future in the same way of cooperation. Although we know, everyone understands that things that you see from Washington look different when you look at them from Jerusalem. It's the nature of the world. You are a superpower and we are a little country. You are far away and we are in the mix of the Middle East. And many other issues which are making the situation even more complicated. But I think that the cooperation is essential to have a better future regarding the issue of Iran. And the more close the cooperation is, the easier to deal with the issues in the future. But from the Israel point of view, it should be very clear. The priority is totally in the Iranian side.
Well, I agree on a couple of things. First of all, I think there's a tremendous amount of sheer work that would have to be done to get an agreement done by November 24th. These are very complicated issues. We're trying to head off multiple paths that Iran might have to a nuclear weapon, whether it be through HEU enhancement, whether it be through plutonium production, or whether it be through covert